You probably didn't finish high school, so you must be stuck in a dead-end job and broke, huh? Showing up at the end of the reunion to dodge the fee is just pathetic. You don't have to force yourself to join the after party either if you're that strapped for cash. Just go home soon. As he threw this insult at me, a former classmate gave me a condescending pat on the shoulder. Today was our first class reunion in 10 years. I arrived at the venue just before it ended due to some unforeseen circumstances. A classmate who had always held a grudge against me quickly noticed my lateness and sneered, "You probably don't have the money to pay the fees. Do you?" I could hear the crude laughter of other classmates behind me. Even though I knew it was pointless to care, the sting of being looked down on boiled inside me, and before I knew it, I was biting my lip hard. Just then, "Oh, you have no idea why he was late, do you? Do you even know his reason for coming late?" The speaker was the most beautiful girl in our grade, who had just appeared on the scene. Thanks to her words, that classmate would soon feel thoroughly embarrassed. Because the truth about me is, I hope I can just make it in time for the after party. I said this as I ended the phone call I had been on and started running toward the restaurant. My name is Mike, and I'm 28 years old. Today is the day of my high school reunion. I was on my way there by train, but due to some trouble along the way, I ended up being late and am now rushing to the venue. The days in high school. A time filled with many bitter and painful memories for me. Honestly, I wondered whether I should even attend the reunion, but there was someone I wanted to see, so I decided to go. Even after 10 years, there's someone I still long to see. Her name is Emma. She was so beautiful that she was the talk of the school, and I'm pretty sure almost every guy in our class had a crush on her. I was one of them. Emma was always surrounded by people, lighting up the room with her smile. On the other hand, I wasn't very outgoing, so I was often alone and got teased by my classmates as being gloomy or a loner. The only thing I really focused on was studying. My mother always said to me, "Just make sure you study. It'll help you in life." So, from a young age, I liked reading and gaining knowledge. Thanks to that, I developed a good study routine, and I enjoyed it enough to get into one of the top high schools in the state. Even in high school, nothing much changed. I often studied alone in the library. One day, as I was heading to the library like always, someone called out to me. It was Emma. She suddenly approached me and said, "I want you to help me study for the upcoming exams." Emma was not only beautiful but also always at the top of the class and an amazing athlete, a truly perfect person. When I hesitated to respond, wondering if I had anything to teach someone like her, Emma stood there with a worried expression, waiting for my answer. Seeing her like that, I realized there was no way I could refuse. From that day on, Emma and I started studying together for a few hours after school. Despite being an excellent student, Emma struggled a lot with math. On the other hand, I wasn't so great at English. Really? In that case, I can help you with English, and you can help me with math, Mike. Emma said with a bright smile. Her smile warmed my heart. Fortunately, our strengths and weaknesses complemented each other perfectly, so we were able to help each other with the subjects we struggled with. As we spent more time together, I started to see new sides of Emma that I hadn't known before. The way she would grimace when she opened her math textbook. How she would pout and sulk when she got stuck on a problem. The way she'd light up with childlike glee when she finally solved a tricky question. And how she couldn't stop talking whenever the subject was her favorite snacks or pop idols. These reactions were so different from the perfect image she usually presented, and I never got tired of watching them. When we studied together, I often found myself just watching her expressions instead of focusing on my work. And the shy smile she'd give when she caught me staring was my absolute favorite. Mike, thank you so much. Thanks to your great teaching, I'm starting to find math a little fun. I think you're exaggerating, but I'm glad to hear that. Honestly, I'm starting to like English a bit more too, thanks to you. So, thank you. We walked through the school as the sun began to set, chatting after another study session. I loved this time just as much as our study sessions. The exams are coming up soon. Emma murmured quietly. It had been over 3 months since we started our one-on-one study sessions, and the exam period was almost here. Emma's face was clouded with worry, likely nervous about the upcoming tests. Wanting to cheer her up, I tried to reassure her. You'll be fine, Emma. I know you'll do great. But she let out a small sigh at my words. Mike, that's not what I'm worried about. What? I couldn't quite grasp what she meant, and I was left puzzled. By then, we had reached the school's entrance. Since we lived in opposite directions, this was where we always parted ways. Let's have a little celebration after the exams are over. It's a promise, okay? She said this while holding out her pinky finger. Is this a pinky promise? I hadn't done this since I was a kid, let alone with a girl, and my mind started to panic. Seeing my hesitation, Emma urged me, come on, hurry up. Pressured by her, I finally extended my pinky, and we made a pinky promise. Pinky swear. There, now it's a promise. I stood there, unable to believe what had just happened, with Emma smiling brightly at me. And then she said, see you later, and Emma left. I was in a daze, and both my pinky finger, which had brushed against Emma's, and my face were warm. At that moment, I was the happiest I'd ever been. It was my first love. Even if I couldn't express my feelings, I hoped these moments would continue. But little did I know that the next day would bring me crashing down. The next day, during a break, I was on my way back to the classroom after using the restroom. Hey, Mike. I heard you've been getting pretty close with Emma lately. I was suddenly called from behind and felt an arm forcefully thrown around my shoulder. David. I saw you two at the entrance yesterday. Since when did you two get so tight? The thought that he had seen our interaction made my face burn with embarrassment. Ignoring my obvious discomfort, David continued. You like Emma, don't you? If that's the case, why don't you go ahead and confess to her? Egged on by David, his group of friends started chanting, do it. Just say it. I can't do that. Even if you're trying to hide it, it's obvious to everyone. Oh, look who's here, Emma. David pointed towards Emma, who was walking our way, chatting with her friends. The moment I saw her, my face felt like it was on fire. Go on, get over there. David, stop. Saying that, David forcefully pushed me from behind. As a result, I was suddenly thrust in front of Emma. She and her friends gasped in surprise. Hey, Emma. Mike here has something to say. A loud shout from behind David's voice. Hearing it, the students around us turned their attention to see what was happening. Wait, is this a confession? No way. And to Emma, of all people. The murmurs from the crowd made me want to run away. But with David and his crew blocking my path, there was no escape. Come on, say it. Confess now, they egged me on. Desperate to get out of this situation, I forced the words out of my mouth. Emma. I like you. Jeers erupted from the crowd. When I looked up, I saw Emma's face twisted in pain. She was clenching her fists tightly, her body trembling slightly. Emma. I'm sorry. I can't. Cutting off my words, Emma shouted and then ran off. Her friends quickly followed after her. As I stood there, watching her leave in a daze, I could hear the sighs and disdainful whispers around me. Oh man, he really blew it. Poor Emma, having someone like Mike crush on her. David approached, a nasty grin on his face. Did you seriously think you had a chance? What an idiot. You and Emma? That's hilarious. David and his gang burst into laughter, doubling over as they watched me stand there, stunned. Oh man, that was priceless. Watching you get dumped like that totally made my day. Thanks, man. With that, David and his friends left me behind, still laughing. The other students around glanced at me with pity before hurrying off as the bell rang, leaving me alone in the hallway. The shock of being rejected made my steps heavy, but I somehow managed to drag myself to the classroom, where I felt everyone's eyes on me. In the distance, David's group was smirking, clearly enjoying my misery. Around Emma, a group of girls had gathered, whispering to her, but when they noticed me, a few of them shot me dirty looks. David had likely spread the story of my confession throughout the class, turning it into a joke. I could hear murmurs all around me, but none of the words registered in my mind. Later, when I tried to approach Emma to apologize, her friends formed a tight circle around her, blocking any chance of getting close. I spent the rest of that day with my head down, avoiding everyone. Even after school, things didn't get any better, and I felt too awkward to face Emma, so I skipped going to the library for the first time. And from that day on, I started skipping school more often. But it wasn't because of Emma. My mother had fallen ill and was hospitalized. She had raised me on her own after my father passed away when I was a child. But the stress finally caught up with her, and she collapsed. A few months later, my mother passed away. I was taken in by relatives, and though my homeroom teacher suggested I say a final goodbye to my classmates, I was too devastated by my mother's death to do so. And so, I left the town where I had spent my days with my parents. Life after that was hard, and just thinking about that disastrous confession day still makes my chest ache. But the days I spent with Emma in the library, and her smile, have always stayed with me, tucked away in a corner of my heart. She had been the emotional support that kept me going. So when I received the reunion invitation, I couldn't help but want to see her, even if just for a moment. Checking my watch as I ran, I finally reached the hotel where the reunion was being held. "Mike. Is that you? Long time no see. The first part is almost over, but you should be able to join the after party." "Really? Sorry for being late." "Don't worry about it. A lot of people are just coming for the after party anyway. Why don't you sit down and rest for a bit? Everyone will be coming out soon." A classmate working the reception suggested I take a seat. I gratefully accepted, resting on a nearby chair after my run. A few minutes later, the door to the reunion hall opened, and the sound of lively chatter filled the air. Well, it's Mike. Showing up at the last minute, huh?" I looked up at the familiar voice, filled with the same old sneering tone. "David. Long time no see. You look pretty worn out. I guess struggling to make ends meet is starting to show on your face." He grinned at me as he spoke. "Oh, I get it. You're too broke to pay the full fee, so you're trying to sneak into the after party instead, huh? Pathetic. Must be tough being poor." He tried to put his arm around my shoulder as he said that. Not wanting to get chummy with him, I dodged David's arm. David's face twisted with irritation, not liking my reaction. Before long, his old crew started to gather around us. Some of them were unfamiliar faces, likely friends he'd made after I left town. "Hey, David, who's that guy? Did he even go to our school?" David grinned at those words. Seeing his face, I had a bad feeling. "Oh, this guy? This is Mike. He was with us in freshman year. He was dirt poor, living with just his mom. Still, he somehow managed to get into our high school. But eventually, they couldn't afford it anymore, and he had to drop out, right? Must have been around winter time? I thought he might have frozen to death somewhere, but I guess he made it. But with a high school dropout as your highest education, I bet you're struggling to find work, huh? Working some dead-end job? Maybe construction or something? Man, it must be rough being poor." He laughed loudly, clearly enjoying himself. Since a lot of what he said was partly true, I didn't bother to argue, but David took my silence as an invitation to continue his insults. "Let me guess, you're here today to see Emma, right? Even after she brutally rejected you back then, you still haven't given up, have you? She's not here yet, but you know someone like you doesn't stand a chance with a girl like her. Just back off. A high-class girl like her needs a high-class guy like me. I'm going to win her over. Oh, and hey, why don't you try confessing again? Just like last time? It was hilarious watching you crash and burn." As David's words brought back memories of that painful day, I felt a bitter sensation welling up in my chest. David was still laughing. But what surprised me was the look on the faces of his friends. Unlike before, they seemed uncomfortable, not joining in with his taunts. Some were even whispering among themselves, casting sidelong glances at David. Maybe they had grown up, even if David hadn't. But despite this, his laughter grated on my nerves, and I considered leaving. If Emma wasn't here, there was no point in sticking around. I'm heading out. I started walking back toward the reception desk. Wait, you're leaving already? You just got here. Come on, stick around for a bit. The classmates working the reception looked surprised as I smiled apologetically. Sorry, I replied, but before I could go, I heard David's voice from behind me. Yeah, get out of here. Go home and read some book on how to save money. I'll be sure to send you an invitation to my wedding with Emma. So start saving up now. I'll invite you as a pity gesture. When I glanced back, David was grinning, shooing me away like I was some stray dog. It was clear that everyone around was uncomfortable with his behavior. Just then, a woman's voice cut through the tension from the entrance. Poor? Who exactly are you calling poor? Everyone turned to see who had spoken. When David recognized the voice, he let out a shout of delight. Emma! And then, everyone around us started murmuring. The appearance of the girl who could be considered the school's Madonna caused everyone to become excited. It had been over 10 years since I last saw Emma, and perhaps because of the makeup she now wore. She looked much more mature, her beauty rivaling that of an actress in a TV show or movie. As I stood frozen, caught between the joy and confusion of finally seeing her again, David quickly moved past me to stand beside her. Emma! It's so great to see you. It's been 10 years since graduation, and you've become even more beautiful. I've been doing well too, you know. I graduated from a prestigious university and landed a job at the renowned Gosway Corporation. I'm about to get promoted soon. I'd love to hear what you've been up to. Why don't we catch up at the after party? Or maybe, we could slip away just the two of us. David was speaking eagerly, but Emma completely ignored him. In fact, she seemed to be glaring at him, though only for a moment, before her face lit up at the sight of me. She waved, her expression brightening like a child's. Mike! I was worried I wouldn't get to see you since you were late, but I'm so glad you made it. Saying that, she ran toward me. Her smile was as pure and innocent as it had been back then, unchanged from when she was just a young girl. Emma! Caught off guard by our unexpected reunion, I fumbled for words, unprepared for this moment. How embarrassing for a grown man. Hey, Emma! Why are you even bothering with Mike? David hurriedly interrupted our conversation, clearly flustered. Emma's expression turned annoyed. Emma, talking to Mike is a waste of time. You know that, right? All he can talk about are his struggles and some depressing stories from a dead-end job. I mean, come on. You know he dropped out of high school and never even graduated. What kind of interesting conversation could you possibly have with someone like that? It's a waste of your time. Besides, Mike was just about to leave anyway because he's too broke to stick around, so why don't you and I? David continued to belittle me right in front of Emma, completely unfazed. That's enough. Your rude comments are really unpleasant to listen to. Emma snapped back sharply. David stammered, What? What, in confusion. Mike, poor? Did you even bother to ask him what he does for a living now? What's there to ask? I mean, he's a high school dropout. It's obvious what kind of jobs he'd be stuck with, right? At first, David was overwhelmed by Emma's retort, but he regained his confidence by mocking me. Seeing him leaning back with a smug expression, as if it was only natural, I found him both ridiculous and a little pitiful. Emma sighed, clearly exasperated. You really don't know anything, do you, David? First of all, Mike didn't drop out, he transferred to another school. And do you even know why he was late to the reunion today? Transferred? Sure, whatever. But let's be honest, he probably went to some lower-level school for poor kids. And as for today's tardiness, I'm sure he was just trying to skip out on the first event to save money. Typical of a poor guy. You're embarrassing yourself. Mike was late because he was helping a pregnant woman who had fallen ill on the train. He was taking care of her as a doctor. Emma's words sent shockwaves through the crowd, leaving David and everyone else speechless. Emma, that's a good one. I didn't know you had a sense of humor. But come on, Mike being a doctor? That's a bit much, don't you think? Humor? Do you really think I'd joke about something like that? The woman Mike helped was my sister. Do you think I'd lie about someone saving the lives of my family? As she spoke, Emma turned to me and bowed deeply. Thank you so much, Mike. Because of you, both my sister and her baby are safe. It was true that I had left our high school during the winter of our freshman year. But that was because my mother had passed away, and I had to move in with relatives in a different town. Our homeroom teacher should have explained everything to everyone, but knowing David, he probably only half listened, made assumptions based on my family situation, and concocted his own version of the story. I did continue my education at a new school. Though it was tough adjusting to life without my mother, dealing with a new environment, and living with relatives, I pushed myself to regain a sense of normalcy. Before she passed away, my mother, in front of our relatives and me, expressed her wish, when I'm gone, please use the insurance money for this child's education and living expenses until adulthood. I don't want my situation to limit the path this child chooses. My relatives honored her wish, ensuring that the funds were used for my education. And then they said, just as your mother wished, go on to further your education and pursue what you want to do. With their support, I set my sights on a single goal. I wanted to become a doctor, the same kind of doctor who had cared for my mother until the very end, never giving up on her. As a child, I was inspired by the doctors and nurses who tirelessly worked to save lives, and I wanted to help others. But the path to becoming a doctor was incredibly challenging. Even though I had always liked studying, getting into medical school required an extraordinary amount of effort. Despite facing setbacks, including repeating a year, I eventually managed to get into a well-known medical school in the country. But getting accepted wasn't the end of the journey. After that, every day was filled with relentless effort and constant learning. There were countless moments when I felt like giving up. It wasn't just about the studying. I had to work to support myself, too. There were struggles with relationships, and even after I started working at a hospital, the job came with sleepless nights and the constant pressure of the profession. It's a job that takes a toll on both your physical and mental health, with no regard for day or night. As that grueling lifestyle dragged on, there were times when I felt so overwhelmed and sad that I wished I could join my parents. But I held on, motivated by my mother's final wishes, the respect and admiration I had for the doctors who treated her, and the memories of those few precious moments I spent with Emma. When I imagined meeting her again, I wanted to be someone I could be proud of. All those years of effort led me to this very day. On my way to the reunion, I was on the train when a pregnant woman came and sat beside me. She wobbled slightly as she took her seat, so I instinctively reached out to steady her. The pregnant woman politely thanked me, saying, "Thank you very much." We exchanged a few words, engaging in small talk. She mentioned that she was on her way back to her hometown to give birth. Her husband was supposed to accompany her, but an unexpected work obligation meant she had to travel alone. Sensing her anxiety, likely due to feeling vulnerable, I said, "It must be difficult to move around with such a large belly. If there's anything I can help with, please let me know." She seemed a bit reassured and managed a small smile. But then, things took a sudden turn. The woman sitting beside me suddenly fell ill. I alerted the train staff, and though I did my best to provide first aid in a clean, safe area, the lack of proper medical equipment made the situation feel precarious. We arranged for an ambulance to meet us at the next station, and I stayed by her side, offering comfort. Just as we were about to arrive, her water broke. There was no time to lose. While calming the panicked pregnant woman and ensuring her safety, I boarded the ambulance with the waiting paramedics. This was because the woman had pleaded with me, "Please come with me." In her moment of vulnerability, she likely wanted someone who had been by her side, even for just a short while, to stay with her. I agreed and went with her to the hospital. Once there, I briefed the waiting doctors on her condition and the emergency care I had provided, then entrusted her to their care. Just as I was about to leave the hospital, having nothing left to do, I noticed a woman running towards me, out of breath. "Excuse me. I'm the sister of the pregnant woman who was just brought in. How is she? Is she okay?" She directed her questions at the doctor I had been speaking with. "Ah, you are her sister. Don't worry, both your sister and the baby are fine. She's with the nurses right now. It's fortunate that she had a doctor on the train with her who knew how to handle the situation." The doctor smiled reassuringly as he spoke. "Is that so? Thank you very much." The woman's tense expression softened with relief as she turned to thank the doctor, but then she froze when her eyes met mine. "The same thing happened to me. Emma. Mike. Wait, what's going on?" The pregnant woman I had helped was, by sheer coincidence, Emma's sister. Now that I think about it, she did resemble Emma in some ways. Mike, you're the one who helped my sister? Thank you, really, thank you so much. It was nothing, really. As I nervously exchanged awkward words during my long-awaited reunion with Emma, I suddenly heard, "Emma." A group of men and women called her name as they approached us. It seemed that her sister's husband and her parents had also arrived. Emma quickly explained the situation to them, and they all expressed their gratitude to me. I humbly bowed my head as they thanked me, but just then, a nurse came over, looking for the family. "You must be the family. Please come with me, we need to go over a few things." With that, I figured my role there was done, so I turned to Emma. "Well, I'll get going now. Mike, you're going to the reunion, right?" "I'm going to stay with my sister a little longer, but I'll head there afterward." "Would you wait for me until then?" With her request to wait for her, I paused for a moment, considering my options. In a way, my goal had already been fulfilled. But seeing the hopeful look in Emma's eyes, I smiled and nodded. Relieved, Emma smiled at me before following the nurse with her family. As she walked away, I remembered the call I had received on the way to the reunion, confirming that both her sister and the baby were in stable condition. Thank goodness. I'm so glad both your sister and the baby are okay. What I did was really nothing. So please make sure to thank the doctors who took over. Emma shook her head. We've already thanked them, but my sister specifically wanted to thank you. She said that your support on the train gave her the strength to keep going, especially when her water broke. She was terrified. But having you by her side in the ambulance helped her stay calm. And when she heard your name, she couldn't believe it was you. Neither could I. Honestly. Yeah, I was just as surprised. But I'm really glad everything turned out okay. I smiled back at Emma. Emma was also smiling, though her eyes were slightly red. She had probably cried from the stress and relief of her sister's ordeal. Even though what I did was minimal, knowing that my presence had helped her sister in some small way was all that mattered to me. Mike, a doctor, and he saved Emma's family? This can't be real. David, who had been eavesdropping on our conversation, muttered in disbelief, his face pale. David, I know you went to a prestigious university and landed a job at a big company, and maybe you're successful. But how can you, as a person, think it's okay to spread false stories and mock a classmate who's been through difficult times? Maybe the people around you have let it slide. But I can't imagine working with, much less dating or marrying, someone who would trample on others' feelings like you do. To be honest, you're the kind of person I never want to see again. Emma's words were sharp and decisive, rejecting both David's behavior and any affection he had for her. Her resolute demeanor was even more impressive than I remembered from our school days. Our classmates, too, seemed mesmerized by her strength. I could have walked away and let things end there, but if I did, I'd be no different from the person I used to be. Like Emma, I need to find the words to say to David myself. David! I called out to him as he hung his head. He flinched for a moment, his shoulders tensing, but then David looked up at me with downcast eyes. Mike! I don't know what misconceptions you had, but everything Emma said is true. I graduated high school and went to university. Now, I'm working at a hospital in the Kansai region. All of this was possible thanks to my late mother and the support of my relatives. You're free to think whatever you want about me, but please, don't speak ill of my family. I looked David directly in the eyes as I spoke. He bit his lip and lowered his head, unable to respond. I believe my words reached him. As the commotion finally subsided, the people around us began to regain the mood to head to the after-party. The lobby, where the reception was held, started to buzz with activity. In the bustle, both David and Emma seemed to have disappeared. Having accomplished my goal of seeing Emma, I considered leaving the venue and exploring the city for a bit. Mike. What? Emma. Before I knew it, Emma was right beside me. Amid the loud chatter all around us, her voice, strangely enough, was the only one that reached my ears clearly. Her face, so close to mine, was as beautiful as ever. Then, she took my hand in hers, holding it tightly with both of her own. My face immediately grew hot. Do you remember the promise we made back then? About having an after-exam celebration? How about we have one now, just the two of us? You remembered that? Emma smiled shyly at my surprised reaction. Faced with the enchanting invitation from someone I had admired for so long, I couldn't bring myself to refuse. I nodded in agreement. Together, we slipped out of the crowd and found our way to a quiet bar. I'm glad we found such a nice place. Yeah, it's perfect. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure she could hear it. After a few moments of silence and sipping our drinks, Emma asked a question out of the blue. Hey, Mike. You're not married, are you? I mean, you're kind and a doctor. You must be popular, right? Popular? Me? No one had ever said anything like that to me before, and I was so taken aback that I quickly denied it. No, not at all. I'm not married, and I don't even have a girlfriend. The head nurse, Nancy, who's been looking out for me since I was a rookie, keeps telling me, you should find a nice girl soon. But I've never really been, popular. My friends and colleagues often share their wedding news, and most people my age at the hospital are already married. As for me, I'm still single, and I often get asked by older colleagues, don't you have anyone special, with concern in their voices. But what about you, Emma? Do you have a husband or partner? If so, I'd love to meet him. I'm sure anyone you chose would be wonderful. I managed to keep a smile on my face, but as I said those words, a pang of sadness hit me. The thought of Emma with someone else, a person who's probably everything I'm not, was almost too much to bear. But to my surprise, Emma's expression turned into a pout, and she seemed upset. Emma. Why are you so dense? You haven't changed at all since back then. She downed the rest of her drink in one gulp. Wait, don't drink it all at once. Mike. Yes? Hearing her call my name so sharply, I instinctively straightened up. Was it the alcohol? When I looked at Emma's face, I noticed her cheeks were flushed. Her eyes, slightly teary, gazed up at me, and the moment our eyes met, my heart skipped a beat. I've actually liked you since back then. The words slipped from her lips, and I could hardly believe my ears. What? But, back then. I recalled the painful memory of that day. The day I confessed my feelings under pressure from David and his gang, only to be rejected so bluntly. That rejection had been etched in my memory ever since. Hadn't that been just as awful for her as it had been for me? Seeing my confusion, Emma slowly shook her head. When you confessed to me that day, I was actually really happy. I felt the same way, and knowing you liked me too made me so glad. But at the same time, I got scared. I was afraid that if we became more than friends, we'd lose the comfortable relationship we had in the library. The thought of that terrified me, and before I knew it, I'd shouted no. So that's what happened. The fear of changing a familiar and comforting relationship into something unknown. I might not have understood it back then, but I could grasp it now. I was so immature then, only thinking about myself. I didn't consider how my response would hurt you. After some time passed and I calmed down, I realized how cruel I had been, and I wanted to apologize. But then you had to deal with your mom's passing. And I didn't get the chance to see you much anymore. As more time went by, it became harder and harder to say anything, and eventually, what I feared most became reality. We drifted apart, and I regretted it so much. After that day, our after-school study sessions came to an end. With my own struggles, I started skipping school more often, and the chances to see her dwindled. I didn't have the courage to talk about it, and so, I ended up transferring to another school. Without saying anything to Emma. We both fell silent, our gazes turned downward. It was Emma who finally broke the silence. Since I was a child, I was always told I was cute or that I'd grow up to be beautiful. My appearance brought me attention and affection. And as a child, I enjoyed that. But as I got older, it started to feel suffocating. People would say, "You don't need to study since you're so pretty," or "It must be nice to be beautiful." They meant well, but I began to feel trapped by my looks. No matter what I did, it was always about my appearance. If I did something that didn't fit the image, I'd get criticized. People expected me to act a certain way because of how I looked. Over time, I found myself smiling like a doll, just to keep up with those expectations. I was stunned to hear her confessing something so deep and painful. I had always thought that being attractive was an advantage, regardless of gender, but I had never considered the burden it could carry. The Emma I knew had always been the center of attention, always smiling. It pained me to realize that some of those smiles were masks she wore to protect herself. Emma, don't look so sad. I did have fun being around everyone, but there were times when I just wanted to shout, "Here I am." And then I noticed you. Mike. You didn't spend much time with the others, but there you were, quietly reading in the classroom, going to the library after school. I envied you. What do you mean? You seemed like someone who was doing what you wanted, living on your own terms. I admired that. And before I knew it, I was always watching you. Eventually, just watching wasn't enough, so I gathered the courage to talk to you. I asked you to help me with my studies. I thought you might say no, but deep down, I felt like you wouldn't refuse. And when you agreed, I was so relieved. She smiled mischievously, a hint of that playful charm I remembered. Being with you felt so comfortable. You were a great teacher, and I started to enjoy math because of you. But more than that, you never judged me. Even when I laughed too loud, rambled on, pouted, or acted like a child, you never told me to stop because it didn't suit my looks. You just accepted me, smiling all the while. That made me so happy. Those moments became something I cherished deeply. They were the only times I could be my true self. Emma looked into my eyes as she continued. Her gaze slightly misty. Her eyes held mine, and I couldn't look away. You were my first love. You're someone I could never forget. That's why I decided to come to this reunion when I found out you'd be here. I wanted to see you, and this time, I wanted to give you a real answer to your confession, one that comes from the heart. I could hardly breathe as I listened to her. Her intense gaze made my heart race, louder and louder in my chest. The confession from that day. Emma said she wanted to redo her response to my confession. Emma. I looked directly into her eyes as I called her name. For a moment, uncertainty flashed across her face. But I smiled, hoping to ease her nerves. Emma, the confession I made that day, it was genuine. But it was also fueled by the pressure and influence of David and the others, making it less than ideal. So, if you don't mind, could I also redo that confession today? I cleared my throat, turning to face her fully. Emma, I've loved you for so long. Even after more than 10 years, there hasn't been a single day when I didn't think about you. I love everything about you, your smile, your pout, everything. Will you be with me, with the intention of getting married? As soon as I finished speaking, tears welled up in Emma's eyes. Yes. I've always loved you too, Mike. I love you so much. She managed to say through her tears, which then began to flow freely. I gently patted her head, and she cried into my chest, her small body trembling with emotion. Thankfully, we were the only ones in the bar, and the bartender discreetly stepped away, leaving us in peace. I held Emma close, feeling the warmth of her presence, until she eventually cried herself out. A few days after the reunion, I received a voicemail. It was from David. Can we meet? I've got something I want to talk about, the message said. I thought it over for a moment before calling him back and agreeing to meet. Thanks for coming, Mike. I know you're busy. It's fine. What did you want to talk about? Given our history, I didn't feel much like making small talk, so I cut straight to the point. David's expression turned serious, and then, to my surprise, he bowed deeply. Startled by his sudden gesture, I took a step back. Mike. I'm really sorry for everything I've done. After that night, everyone really let me have it. They all knew your situation, why you had to transfer schools. I was the only one who didn't bother to find out, who just assumed I was better than you because of some superficial success. They told me I'm still just the same immature kid from back then, and they were right. I'm ashamed of how I treated you. I don't expect you to forgive me, and I know this apology is selfish, but I just wanted to say how truly sorry I am. David must have done some serious reflecting after hearing from our classmates. While his actions had been inexcusable, the sincerity in his apology was clear. "It's okay, David." "Mike." When David finally looked up, I noticed the dark circles clearly visible under his eyes. The confident, handsome David I remembered from high school, the one all the girls used to fawn over, seemed like a distant memory. A lot has happened, but let's move forward. Take care of yourself. With that, I turned to leave, retracing my steps. Thanks for hearing me out, Mike. Take care. I heard him say behind me, but I didn't respond, simply walking away. Honestly, I'll never forget what David did. But I'm glad I listened to what he had to say. 6 months after our reunion, Emma and I got married. Most of the guests were connected to her, but I also invited a few high school classmates. I didn't invite David, but through a mutual friend, I received a message from him saying, "Congratulations. Wishing you happiness." I also heard that David had left his prestigious job and moved out of his parents' house to work on a farm in the Tohoku region. Apparently, he wanted to rebuild himself and became interested in food as a foundation of health. In a recent photo I was shown, David was bearded, covered in dirt, and grinning in his work clothes. "That's a nice smile," Emma murmured. "Yeah. But it doesn't hold a candle to the smile we're sharing today," I said as I lifted Emma in her wedding dress. Cheers erupted from all around us. "Hey, Mike, stop it." Emma blushed, clearly embarrassed by my actions, but her smile was filled with happiness. As I gently kissed her forehead, I made a firm vow in my heart, I would never let go of this smile again. We don't always get to choose whether we're born into a fortunate situation or not. And what constitutes fortunate varies from person to person. But I believe that very few people can find lasting happiness by simply resting on the laurels of a fortunate environment. To sustain happiness, we must continue to put in effort. It's through that effort that we find the true blessings and happiness life has to offer.